Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. All of our intelligent conversations now presented by Wise Markets. So they are, in fact, wise conversations. We're eating better, spending less, and getting ready for Mother's Day around here and post-draft time as well. Also want to give a shout-out to our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. My pal Doug Workman, you hear me talk about him so much, working on the well water out at WNST in the burbs. As spring has sprung, it was a little weird with the draft being the same weekend as the Kentucky Derby. It feels like we're hitting our head now on the Preakness here next week. But I'm going back to some folks that I maybe wanted to have on before the draft, draft nicks and experts. I tend to prefer to bring them on after the draft to talk about whatever the aftermath is. And usually the Ravens get B pluses or A minuses. Gary Davenport's been doing this for a long time at Bleacher Report. He is a defending champion. But first time on our Zoom channel, it is good to see you. How are you, Gary?
Oh, I am doing well. It is good to be here. It's been a while since we had the opportunity to chat.
Well, the draft's funky in that it used to be more a bigger part of my life where, like, I would get the Arlad's books and the Bushbaum books and the Mel Kiper, who's from Baltimore, back in the 90s, in the era when we're drafting the Peter Boulwares and the Chris McAllisters. We would throw giant parties because it was on a Saturday. We'd drink beer. We'd throw darts. We'd shoot pool. We'd throw horseshoes. We'd drink more beer. We'd eat crab cakes. Now it's just a different thing. It's a Thursday night. It's a made-for TV event. Goodell is has made himself the centerpiece of the whole presentation. This goofy chair it's like a WWE thing gone mad from a presentation standpoint. But then you get down to the players and the drafting process and teams' needs, which is where the nerd in me comes in. I think my football team got better this weekend, and I usually feel that way about the Ravens, and most of the time I'm right.
Well, it's a team that, going back, DeCosta's done an excellent job, and before him, obviously, Ozzie Newsome was one of the best GMs in the business. It seems like every year, if there's a year where they do have, kind of a glaring team need, they address that need. If it's a year where they don't have that huge hole, they get a best player available. They trade up into the first round of the draft and draft a Lamar Jackson. This is just, and it speaks to the Ravens, continual success that they've been able to have as a franchise. One of the ways that you're able to do that and remain a contender in the long term over a period of 5, 10, 15 years is you have to draft well year in and year out. Especially nowadays with the rookie pay scale and everything, and how important it is to hit on those early picks and get those key contributors in on those smaller contracts. It's more important than ever.
Gary, it feels to me like sometimes they're playing chess and everybody else is playing checkers, right? And because it's not just, all right, we have the 27th pick in the draft, we're going to pick a player, right? And we're going to be good at doing that, and we're going to scour every university and every piece of tape. We're going to talk to their coaches. We're going to have character reports. We're going to give them the Rorschach test. We're going to give them the saliva test. We're going to give, we're going to have them jump through hoops and run around in their underwear and all of that, all that process. But the Ravens take it a step further in the way that they have been able to manage the developmental picks or developmental players, hide them on the roster. But more than that, these fourth-round sandwich picks, the fifth-round sandwich picks, losing premier players to free agency, and then saying, well, that's okay, we'll get a pick out of that next year. This year, they were even more proactive in saying, well, if Orlando Brown doesn't want to be here, we're going to get rid of him anyway. Why do we want to wait till 23 to get a pick for him? Let's move now. Let's sign a veteran, and let's go get 27 and 31. Then draft night comes. And I was convinced they weren't going to take both of those picks, right? I was convinced they were going to play some more hokey pokey and go from 31 back to 48 and pick up a 3 next year, because that's what, and they wound up picking up a 4 next year already. They're just really well oiled about the long-term play in a way that there's only a handful of teams that play that way, because whoever's picking for the Browns this week, or John Dorsey next week, or whoever's Scott McClure, whoever those people are, they're not going to be the same people in 2023 as there were picking the players last week. At least half of them will be blown up. The Ravens always feel like they're not going to be part of that. They don't mind building something where other teams are trying to win right now.
Yeah, they've had that continuity as a franchise. You've only had the 2 general managers going back years and years and years. The Orlando Brown trade, they did about as good as could reasonably be expected. Now, for fans of all the other AFC contenders, I mean, maybe in a perfect world, he would have been shipped to Kansas City. That didn't make things any easier on that side of the bracket.
Says a lot to me about what they think of him.
They were the team that was willing to offer that first-round pick that they were then able to turn around and use to get Jason Owa, who's a guy that they needed after losing Juden and Ngakoue in free agency. The day 3 picks, Sean Wade was a fantastic pick for the Ravens. I mean, I think he is going to outplay his draft slot by a mile if you leave him inside where he belongs. He tried to play the boundary last year at Ohio State. It didn't work out. The year before that, if he'd come out after the 2019 season, he wouldn't have got out of the second round of the draft. He played that well.
And when you say something like that about the Ravens, like, I hope the Ravens keep him inside. Man, Wink's 3 steps ahead of you, right? I mean, so's Eric, right? Like, they know exactly what they want to do with a player. They're not here to change players. I think they're here to maximize players. And I think that kid, I agree with you. Like, that kid would have been a second-round pick and applauded last year by everyone, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was talk of him heading into the 2020 season that if he played again like he did in 2019, he was going to be a first-round pick. But he had struggled. Now, granted, last season was just weird, and he was hurt part of the year, but he struggled moving to the outside. He's a much better slot corner than he is on the boundary. That's just the reality of it. And it gives the Ravens some insurance. Taylor Young's had a lot of problems staying healthy these past few years. It gives them some insurance in there and keeps that. I mean, when healthy, that Ravens cornerback room is as good as any in the league, and they're not going to miss a beat this year. The AFC North, to me, really does feel like a 2-team race in 2021. I don't want to count out the Pittsburgh Steelers because they're the Steelers and they're another team that has enjoyed consistent success for a very long time. By the way, it's hilarious.
This is like a big theme here this week. Luke's already put the whammy on Tomlin. Here you come in. Everybody's just – I've watched the Steelers for I was an Oilers fan, Gary, right? Like, when the Colts weren't here, I was an Oilers fan. Me and Dan Pastorini get together and weep once in a while, you know? And so I am never going to count the Steelers out. Not. And you know, re-upping Tomlin the way they did, they took this big fat back who's going to try to run, you know, like, I don't know why they took him, but it sounds to me like they think they're going to run you over all of a sudden, and they're not worried about how old and fat their quarterback is.
I love Najee Harris. My worry with them is the offensive line in front of them. I mean, that was a team, the offensive line struggled last year, and they lost 3 starters coming off of last year. With Villanueva, from all indications, looks like he's going to be wearing black and purple next year. So I agree with you. You can't completely count the Pittsburgh Steelers out, but that's a team that is springing some pretty big leaks, whether it's that offensive line. They lose Alvin Dupree on the edge. Now, granted, they still have T.J. Watt, but now he's just going to be the focus of opposing offenses that much more. Lose 2 of your top 3 cornerbacks. Roethlisberger did not look good down the stretch last year. I mean, this doesn't say I don't think the Steelers can make the playoffs. I just don't know that they're going to be able to hang with the Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns in that division.
I love when you talk dirty. I love when you come on Baltimore radio and talk to me like that. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. You know, it really is, Gary.
As a Browns fan, I'm trying not to be too optimistic because optimism and Cleveland do not go together well.
I had Andy Billman on last month. You can go check that out, the Believe Land guy. We went through that.
But Andrew Berry, I mean, I want to feel like the Cleveland front office is turning into what Baltimore has been for the last 15 years. Now, granted, Andrew Berry's only been in town a couple years, but he's killing it.
You guys are hilarious. You're talking about like comparing the Browns to the Ravens now. It's going to get dirty finally. Finally, the gloves are going to come off in this Baltimore-Cleveland thing because they're both good. You know, and we've waited a long time, right, for this to happen. But I don't think we're out of the triangle yet that we're just going to like breeze through Breezewood, go up to Pittsburgh, kick their ass, and come home because it's never been that easy around here.
Well, it wasn't the playoffs last year.
Gary Davenport joining us here from Bleacher Report on the back end of the draft. Let's go back to the beginning here. 27-31. You know, I could have had you on last week and talked before the draft, and I had a lot of people on. All the speculation, the drama of the Liars Luncheon and DaCosta saying, we're insulted that you don't love our wide receivers. Then he goes out and drafts 2 wide receivers. All week long when I talk to people like you, everybody said they got 2 picks now. They're going to take a wide receiver because they can, and there's going to be a guy like Bateman there, you know, figure out who it's going to be at that point. I'm not shocked they took a wide receiver or two at this point, and that the other kid fell the way he did into the fourth round. But this is walking out on a plank with something they haven't been good at and saying, you know what, Duvernay, Prochet, Hollywood Brown, we're just going to keep coming at you because we're not going to give a wide receiver $20 million in this offense, because we're going to have to give the kid running the ball and throwing the ball $40 million to play in it next year. And we're going to have to draft a wide receiver. And organizationally, that's clearly – they were going to come out of this thing with two because they needed to. And now all of a sudden, you brag about their cornerbacks and you brag about, well, they've always figured out how to get the most out of a Judon, so they'll figure out Owa. And the offensive line, they lost Yonda and they're adjusting with Zeitler and they're doing all of that. The wide receiver thing has been the sort of the open sore here the last couple of months. And watching veterans not have any interest in coming, and then having the Sammy Watkins debate as to whether he would be an impact wide receiver. Gary, I asked them in the Liars lunch, I said, what do you really want the productivity of that room to be? What will the totality of your wide receivers be in a Super Bowl winning year? Because they don't really want to throw the football here.
I don't think the Ravens necessarily need great wide receivers because, like you said, as constructed, it's not a team that's going to be out there gripping and ripping it 45, 50 times a game. And if they are throwing it that much, then something's gone wrong and they're
losing.
going off script.
They're losing.
Exactly.
And they're on the path to losing more if they do that.
I'm not surprised that they took Bateman where they did. I mean, if he can recapture his 2019 form where he averaged, I think it was 20.3 yards of reception in Minnesota, he was hit as hard by the 2020 season as any wide receiver was. He had COVID, has said that he didn't feel right most of that season. So I wasn't even a little bit surprised by either one of those picks because it really did stand out as the team's biggest two needs were the wide receiver spot and adding an edge rusher. And the board just kind of fell the right way to him. There wasn't really an edge guy who stood out in this draft class like Chase Young last year, that there's this alpha guy who's head and shoulders above everybody else. So you were able to get, Owe was the top guy on some boards, despite the fact that he didn't have a sack last year because, his athleticism and potential is just off the charts. And the wide receiver class was just so deep. It's just hard to find fault with either pick.
Well, in the wide receiver case, they drafted two guys who hold the ball, who catch the ball, right? Like in this offense, if you catch the ball, we're going to move the chains because we have enough weapons, and the quarterback is the premier weapon in the sport, literally in open space. No one wants to try to tackle him, right? That being a wide receiver in this offense, if you catch the ball, that's going to keep you on the field. And that's been an issue here. And route running, the thing on Bateman is route running. They've had real miscommunication problems at various points and taking more practices away, which Harbaugh hates, right? Like the communication part should be starting next week at OTAs in sort of a normal way. The 17-game thing and the Players Association and all of that. But the passing game is intricate to that point, that route running is something, and catching the ball was as important as how tall you are, how short you are, where you are, because I think Greg Roman thinks they're going to scheme this up. And the idea is be open and catch it.
Right. They don't necessarily need a wide receiver who's taking the top off the defense and catching 40-yard passes. They need a guy who's going to run the right route, be where he's supposed to be, catch an 11, 12-yard pass, and like you said, move the chains. Or on 3rd and 7, when they run it on first down, it doesn't, and they've got that 3rd and medium or 3rd and long. That guy who can just keep drives going. The Ravens aren't really designed to be a quick hit, score in 3 plays offense. They want to grind you. They want to move the ball down the field. They want to control the tempo of the game. And just
shorten the game big time.
Right. And
when they're winning and things are going right and they're 14-2, those games are over at 3:45. They're just over.
Yeah, well, if they get that run game going, and it's going to be J.K. Dobbins is going to have himself a year in 2021. I have no doubt.
Well, and you talk about the deftness of their trading and moving around. Last year, the angst about Hayden Hurst, and they get this pick and they turn it into a running back that they love. Gary Davenport is here. He's at Bleacher Report. We talk about the Ravens, and you'll talk about your Browns, but for the league itself, If I would have had you on last week, we would have been talking about going into the draft. We would have been talking about 17 games, would have talked about these disgruntled quarterbacks from Green Bay to Seattle, the situation in Houston. Who the hell knows what's going on there? Brady comes back as a favorite again as a 44-year-old quarterback. You and I haven't even gotten together since he won the last Super Bowl. The league is as vibrant as it's ever been. And Gary, I'm about to go into my 30th year doing sports radio here in Baltimore, about to celebrate, doing this crab cake tour this summer. And when I see what baseball has become, baseball has played its way into horse racing. Horse racing, we have the Preakness here next week, and it is what it is. I mean, they don't even send me a note to try to get a guest on. It's insane, right? And I see where the NBA and the NHL in my city, I don't see flags up. I don't see people moving around. I don't see people moving toward it. We're in a lacrosse community here a bit. That football has so, in the last 10 years, baseball will never be spoken about like that again. Like it's the same thing as football. There really is football and there's everything else. And you can make your NBA case. And on any given weekend when there's a Masters or a race car or this or that. But it really is amazing because it's been your life and it's been a prime mover in my life for a quarter of a century now that this football team came here. And we have one of the 32 of them after taking yours from Ohio, right? But the league, I mean, baseball's about to go to war with their players next year, right? Like nobody's going to the games. Football's going to roll this out, and I have no doubt when I get to Vegas, whenever that is, the Ravens play in Vegas this year, I'll be able to bet the games, walk the strip, go in. There'll be 78,000 people in there, and the NFL will be the first thing to come back to not normal, but better than normal, kind of like Amazon and Walmart.
Oh, the NFL is an absolute juggernaut. I mean, you look at how well they handled the pandemic this past season. I mean, granted, it wasn't perfect, and there were bumps in the road, but I think they did it as well as you could reasonably expect.
We played a Wednesday afternoon game.
Right. I mean, you look at what you were talking about the draft earlier and the 3-day spectacle that it's become. Look at the TV ratings that draws. I mean,
it's almost terrible, right? Like, I mean, I was thinking, what are these poor people doing? These poor bastards in Cleveland down there freezing, like the music overriding it was terrible. I mean, really terrible. Right? I think. I mean, versus what it used to be when Chris Berman and Mel Kiper were there talking about football and in the Felt Forum and like football was the focus. And I know that that's not what they're going for, but it's weird.
Yeah, but they had 150, 200,000 people, and that was with limited capacity because of the pandemic. I mean, a couple of years back in Nashville, you've got 400,000 people descending on this town for the draft. Baseball and basketball wishes they could pull in the kind of TV numbers the draft does for like the NBA finals can't pull that kind of number. We'll see, I think it's May 12th, right, that the schedule release is.
Correct.
You'll see better TV ratings for that than you will for a Major League Baseball playoff game.
Gary, for the league and for the sport and coming back to normal and all that stuff, it was nothing was normal, right? Like the season wasn't normal, the tape wasn't normal, the combine, the interview process, all of that. Where do you grade on all of that some teams would excel at that? Because we talked about the Ravens and their continuity, and I can go on and on and on. I love the Ravens. I mean, we're blessed that they are so industry standard good at what they do, and nobody ever comes on from out of town and really bitches about the way they do things, right? But this should be a year more than any other year where all of these kids they drafted, they have more intel, more ways to do this than other teams who really are thrown together. Sometimes the people making the picks don't know each other all that well. They don't have a system. There was no normalcy to any of the process of how these kids were evaluated. This is a real outlier draft. And I think, much like I'll go back to the Kentucky Derby, that if you know anything about horse racing, you don't let a Baffert horse go off at 12-1, right, on Derby Day, right? I would think that there were some real smarties, some Moneyball things in this draft that a couple of organizations are going to wind up having done a lot better because there was less information available, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I will say that for the most part, honestly, the draft went better than I expected. I expected a few more head scratcher picks, and that's not to say that there weren't. Because like you said, teams didn't have the medical information that you would most years. They didn't have the opportunity to meet with players like you would most years. But overall, I think a lot of teams did relatively well, and the teams that didn't do well are teams that never do well. I mean, you look at, I hate to bag on the Raiders, but the Las Vegas Raiders drafts since the Mike Mayock, John Gruden duo came to town are just every year they reach for a guy a round plus too early. So, of course, the first thing they do in Cleveland is go get Alex Leatherwood, who's will probably be a decent right tackle, but he's a decent right tackle you could have had in the middle of round 2 instead of the middle of round 1. You look at, the Cincinnati Bengals are not necessarily known for being a fantastically run organization.
Well, they spend so much on their scouting. Yeah, I think their scouting department is reading your blogs at Bleacher Report.
All 4 of them. I don't have a problem with the Jamar Chase pick in a vacuum, in that Jamar Chase is a fantastic talent at wide receiver, but they didn't do enough to address the line in front of Joe Burrow. And it's your star quarterback, the face of your franchise, the guy, the savior of Cincinnati, who's coming off a torn ACL, and you've got an all-world tackle just sitting there in a draft class that's ridiculously deep at wide receiver, and you take the white out. I don't get it.
Gary Davenport, second guesses, general managers for a living at Bleacher Report. You can follow him. You're still ID Sharks, yeah?
IDP Sharks, yes, sir.
IDP Sharks. I don't have it up in front of me, but I want to make sure we're getting everybody ready for fantasy. Where are you on the fantasy and the gambling thing? I would say this, we're getting gambling here. It's going to be on the phone. I'm not Barney Rubble, bet. I'm not that guy. It never have been when it comes to sports, because I've talked to too many coaches and they have no idea who the hell's going to win. So, how could I on the inside? But the leagues in baseball and watching baseball the first month that they're going all in on betting and all of that. I know you've been a fantasy sports player for a long time. Give me a little coloring on the money and the gambling side of this as we do go to Vegas and this becomes even more ubiquitous than it already was, let's say.
Yeah, I wish that the state of Ohio, we have daily fantasy sports here, but we do not have legalized sports gambling, and I wish we did. If we did, I'd throw a few bucks on a game now and again. It's just, the reality is it's going to be everywhere at some point. It's a revenue stream for the league. It's a revenue stream for sites like DraftKings and FanDuel that are going to have these sports books where you can just hop on an app and throw a few bucks on the game.
Let's be honest, it was a primary revenue stream in horse racing forever. It was the reason it was there, right?
And all these states are going to make money off of it too. I don't see, granted, you don't want people to gamble the kids' college fund away, and that is going to happen with a few people, but I don't see how it's any different than, like you said, going down to the racetrack, or how many states don't
playing the lottery, for crying out loud, or going over to the casino and pulling arms, or playing cards, or rolling dice, whatever your Jones is. I'm not here to be the vice captain. I just think it's going to change things, and I do think with referees flying in for games, it is absolutely ripe for picking in that way. You find whoever makes the least amount in the sport, that's where the corruptibility is, and that's where the Tim Donahue's, and that's the thing that for me with sports that concerns me on that end, that I see overtly baseball getting involved in gambling after not for forever, and after Jimmy the Greek had to talk about the intangibles back in the day, and Chris Berman couldn't talk about the spread, and Musburger would talk under his tones. All the things we've been exposed to all of our lives. I'm not against it. I just know it's going to change things. That's all.
Oh, absolutely. Who would have thought, even 10 years ago, that we'd have an NHL team and an NFL team in Las Vegas? It used to be, the thought of that was just inconceivable. I don't know that we'll see the NFL become as involved with gambling sites as maybe, say, Major League Baseball or the NBA. It's only because the NFL really doesn't have to. Now, let's not say they won't.
But they're greedy, dude. They ain't leaving a nickel anywhere, man.
NFL owners like that money, but they're certainly, they're not hurting for rent money right now. And that's one of the joys of owning one of those 32 teams is, as much as it annoys me to hear the owner of a baseball team, like the Dolans in Cleveland, to pile on the Indians because they always want to cry poor despite the fact they're
I'm in Baltimore.
We're
not even trying, bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not even trying.
I've watched maybe 3 or 4 innings of Indians baseball since the season started.
Yeah, the Orioles have been on the West Coast. Luke covers them, and we did a weekend of the draft, and we were going to talk about their weekend in Oakland, and we just decided no one wants to listen to it. You know what I mean? I mean, literally, why would I be talking about baseball when I could talk about football? And that being said, I'm not being a dick. I talk baseball all the time. You know what I mean? But like this week and the next week with nobody cares about the Preakness, but you know what? I'm going to talk about it anyway because I like it and I like the people associated with it and the guests that we bring on. And it's the only week of the year I get to do it. I wish horse racing were a concern where I had to talk about it. With baseball, I ran a sports company here. It's my 30th year, Gary, of doing this. I mean, I started this from baseball, and now we have a 2-year lease here, and the owner's wearing cowboy boots and prancing around Nashville, and everybody's telling me, well, they could never leave. The owners would never let them leave. I'm like, the owners will let anything happen that brings them money, which is how the Washington team got here to begin with. So I've seen their malfeasance here. You know what I mean? Like, they've screwed up the Nationals television broadcast by being associated with it and screwed the owner out of about $200 million. So on and on and on and on. And now next year they're going to have a labor war. I don't know how anybody comes to baseball. Gary, my last name's Aparicio, right? Like, if they don't want me at the ballpark, who do they want?
I can't imagine that any sports fan of any team in any city of America would look at their team and say there's absolutely no chance that they'll move. That's just not true.
You're in Cleveland.
I know. Yeah.
Gary Davenport joins us here from Bleacher Report and talks fantasy and does a whole bunch of stuff with the draft and getting ready. I'm going to miss these OTAs probably more than hardball even. We used to have some fun with this stuff and the mandatories, but I don't think they need them to be a talking point, right? I mean, the Ravens, to your point, are going to sign tackles this week in the Justin Houston sweepstakes, and all of that's going to go on. Whatever's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the NFL stays in the news. There'll be a schedule next week. There'll be road trips. I don't know that they need torn ACLs on back practice fields in May anymore, right?
No, I don't. I especially don't think you need veteran players in there. I mean, the guys that just now entered the league, maybe your second-year guys who spent their rookie season on the practice squad, those guys can use the reps. They can use the coached up. But if you've been in the league, I mean, you don't have to tell Pernell McPhee how to rush the passer. He's been doing it for the last 12, 13 years. So just wait for training camp. Like you said, you don't need to risk the injuries. And we've got plenty to talk. We're going to be talking about Aaron Rodgers until who knows,
until he's back on Jeopardy. Gary, I appreciate you, man. You're always a great guest. Thanks for coming on, pal.
Oh, my pleasure.
Gary Davenport joining us here from Bleacher Report. All of our intelligent conversations brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets. They're now Wise Conversations. We're eating better. We're spending less, getting ready for a big Mother's Day weekend and beyond. The Crab Cake Tour getting started next week as well with our friends at Fadley's and Costas. You'll be finding all of that as well as more of our conversations at BaltimorePositive.com.